I think that anything related to language access will be revolutionary in this era. I believe with all my heart that interpreters will never be able to be replaced. There is a cultural situation that I hope computers can never get. But in the middle of this, we have to join technology with what we do, what we know, and make sure that the opportunities to communicate are broader and are bigger.
Okay, it is 5 minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead and start our panel. Our panel discussion is Building a Diverse and Inclusive Tomorrow, Language Access and Beyond. And we have a wonderful set of panelists. I would love to introduce themselves. First, I'm Shawn Norris. I'll be moderating this panel. I have experience as an interpreter coordinator, Section 1557, an ADA coordinator for healthcare system. I'm also a practicing sign language interpreter and all-around business person as well. I also work with different organizations and nonprofits supporting healthcare interpreting in general, and also the interpreting and sign language interpreting fields. So I would like to hand it off first to Denise. Would you mind telling us about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Denise Carter. There's a little bit of noise in the background. I apologize. I've actually got some construction happening, so there's not much I can do about that. I am an attorney, and I've been in business for a long time, and I currently have a consulting firm that does culture architecture and workplace social justice. So, DEI really writ large in a different way. If you don't have a good culture, you can't do anything else related to DEI. So I believe firmly that doing the right thing has always been the best way to keep up strong practices and have a good business. So hence the title of my organization. I'll kick it over to Katherine.
I love the organization name, by the way. I have to say that.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Denise. My name is Katherine Adames, currently the Director of Interpreting Services at Effective. In addition to this, and very proud and honored, I am a certified medical Spanish interpreter. I've been in the language industry for 20 years this July. Yes, 20 years, Katherine. And I have occupied different positions, which include training, recruiting, and also operations in general for interpreting services. Rodrigo?
Wonderful. Oh, yeah, Rodrigo.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Rodrigo Figueroa, and I am a healthcare professional for about 13 years. I have been working in Hopkins for some time. Right now, I am transitioning to Children's National Hospital, which I will be starting in a month. And I've been a healthcare manager for more than 15 years, because prior to that, I was doing some dental industry work with managing some clinics in Chicago and then here in Maryland. I've been in the language access business for many, many years throughout my career. And right now I was also the chair of DEI in Hopkins and Suburban Hospital. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, guys. Everyone. This is such a wonderful panel. And I mean, I would like to go ahead and start us off with our first question. And that's what does language access mean in the context of diversity and inclusion? I know often it doesn't seem to always be forefront of mind when we think of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I mean, those of us here on this panel, we know that's a big part of it. But who would like to kind of tackle that? I'm like, what does language access mean in that setting?
All right, I can start
with that. Please, Denise.
So you're right. Oftentimes people don't think about these various kinds of access when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion. But if we think about the notions that I would say are the most important to DEI, it's really DEIB, right? It's always different kind of acronyms, but justice, inclusion, all these things. But the belonging piece with the silent B in DEI is really what's important, the B and the equity component of it. And there's not really a way to get to belonging if you're not able to connect with people in their own most authentic selves. And one of the ways that we are able to be our most authentic selves is through the language that we use. Language is culture. And so it's really important to make sure that people are able to communicate from an effectiveness standpoint, but also from just a true self authenticity standpoint within the language that makes the most sense for them. And when I think about that, we oftentimes think about language in terms of Spanish versus English versus, one of the Indian dialects, for example, or these very Mandarin, whatever the case may be. But I think it's also really important to think about the different kinds of social languages that we talk about. For example, there's AAVE, right? So African American Vernacular English. There are all the different kind of ways that maybe we had social stratification before based upon language. And I think it's important that we do not deify some people because they speak the King's English, so to speak, or people in the opposite realm as well. We want to make sure that we're really thoughtful about understanding what it is that people are saying and not the way that they're saying it. So if they're not using the so-called correct grammar or correct syntax, that's really not the key component. Is can we understand what they're saying? Can we get to the bottom of what they really want to do, have, and mean?
Did anyone else want to add to that?
I would say from my point of view and my experience, I am a manager of patient access, and I think it's extremely important to understand at the first level of communication, because we are in charge of the emergency department and we are not getting happy patients. We are getting all distressed patients and families and family members. So it is crucial to understand what they are saying to us and how we can best help them. And for that, I think that the first thing that we need to tackle is awareness, signage and awareness everywhere where you walk in, so people feel comfortable and we are embracing their needs. We let them know that they are safe with us. That is the first component for me. And the second one, obviously, training. Open up this array of training, of cutting edge development for everyone to understand how to really treat and communicate with distressed patients. I think that those two are the most important, and ongoing training as well.
To me, there is a very basic definition for language access. I think everyone has a right to communicate and to be understood. And if we think about this way, then I think things could be clearer. And Denise said it nicely. It's not only what you're saying or how you're saying it, is that you feel people want to communicate with you. We want to understand you. And from an interpreter standpoint, this is also very important. We train our interpreters so that they can understand different types of languages, but are we training them to also understand ways in which people are communicating? Are we training them enough to get to the bottom of the person's need in a healthcare institution, in education, which is very big right now? We have a high influx in immigration and people that come from communities that do not speak not only English, but also in my case, Spanish. They do not speak the Spanish that I was taught in school. But am I, as an interpreter, letting them know that I want to make sure that the doctor, the teacher, the attorney understands what they're trying to communicate?
Very good.
Thank you very much. You guys all had so many different points that I'm like, I want to touch on all of it, because to me, all of us are very passionate about this subject. But I think I want to tap into Denise's legal expertise as well. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of language access comes from different laws that have been in place. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is what lays the groundwork for a lot of languages to have access to healthcare in general, access to government and public entities and things like that. Those rights have been around for a while now, but yet we see that communities who are coming from other countries or speaking different languages other than English, they are not aware that this right is afforded to them. What are some ways that we can help by being more diverse and inclusive, but also supporting the awareness that language access is a legal right, but also something that we have to start building in from the outset?
Yeah, I think the answer is partially included in your actual question, which is awareness. So one thing is honestly making people know that this is something that you're entitled to. So that's a big piece. I also want to take a step back too, and I want to say, without any kind of judgment whatsoever, that we talk about rights that we're accorded and afforded and are entitled to, but then there's also the reality of what there are budgets for, which again, there need to be budget for all of this. Like, by no means is it appropriate to say we don't have a budget for this. That's not correct. But the truth of the matter is that that doesn't always happen. And so those of us that are in administration, executive leadership roles need to really take that in hand and realize that these are access areas that have to be accounted for. We don't, no organization wants to be in a position of being legally responsible for not having abided by the letter of the law because they haven't known better, they've been ignorant, or because they haven't been able to meet the budget. That's not an appropriate guideline. That said, there are all kinds of different, more nuanced ways that we can approach these kinds of ideas in terms of access. And so I think we want to start off with looking at what the community is. And so it makes sense to take a look at what community language access is most prevalent, or what community languages are most prevalent, and try and make sure that we meet those needs, and then move backwards from there. Not because if we've only got one person in a community that speaks a language, they are less important, but just because we need to take a look at meeting the needs of the many in some regard, and then moving forward from there. But yeah, I think awareness is a big piece. People have to understand that they do have rights. If they can make a big enough stink, sometimes that gets things moving.
That's an interesting point. I think about coming from a sign language background, but my parents are deaf, and a lot of people will come to me from different languages and they're like, oh, sign language interpreters and their rights are so much further ahead than ours. And I was like, yeah, but you had yours since 1964. I was like, ADA's only been around since the 90s. You know, we've had previous laws going back to like 73 and things like that, but that was very specific instances. The broader base wasn't until 1990. But I think really it goes back to a lot of deaf people are quote unquote Americans, but they were born and raised here, so they're well aware of those rights, and they're still within a generation or two of those rights being provided to them. And so like growing up, I was taught ADA. Even though I myself may not always use the ADA for myself, but my family members use it all the time as a reference. And you know, it kind of comes to like what you're saying, who's willing to raise a stink about it? It's you know, maybe lack for a better phrase, but maybe raising that awareness and saying, hey, it's okay to complain and say that this is a right that's afforded to you, and that someone should make an effort to provide you these rights. Katherine, did you have something? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I just want to add one more thing. And here as well, when we talk about raising a stink, there's ways to say this in a very appropriate, kind fashion, right? You oftentimes get more flies than honey, and so on and so forth. One other thing I want to make clear too is also the idea of critical access or critical mass. And so oftentimes if there's one person in the community that speaks a certain language, right? And they need services, they still need those services, but it's sometimes difficult to get a smaller number of people that kind of access. And so there's that whole balancing. But your point is still well taken, that people are entitled to this. And so let's figure out how we can get folks. There are sometimes other workarounds that may not be the most ideal, but the bottom line is everyone's entitled to be heard and understood, especially if we're talking about from a healthcare perspective. It's so critical. How are you going to be able to get the appropriate treatment and care if people don't understand what it is that your needs are, your wants are, or your symptoms are? And I'm sorry, Katherine. My time
No worries. It was very short what I have to share. I think minority communities like the one that I belong to have done a great job by letting their people know that they have a right to be understood. You will catch me, you would catch my friends telling them, if you need an interpreter, you can ask for one and they should provide it to you. And I think that more and more communities need to know this and need to share this along. We're servicing a very large community right now of Mayan speaking people, and they are bringing others on, saying, hey, they have an interpreter for you. You can come along and you'll be understood. So I think it starts with the people. It starts with one person understanding that this is a right and you're entitled to do this, to this for the longest, like you said, Shawn, and spreading the word around. Social media has a great impact. LSPs have a great impact. It's not all about sales. We understand that this is a right that people have, and we have to make sure that it is, put in these organizations. We've seen a lack of services, and it's not only for spoken language. Shawn, I think you've seen this from, firsthand. And when we think about ASL, we think it's only signing. There are so many other ways of communicating within this community that even us in this industry don't end to understand what it is.
That's great. I would,
If I
go ahead,
may add,
Rodrigo. Yes,
may
please.
add something, I think that also acknowledging all these needs, I think that every organization um, should follow through with multilingual communication as soon as people walk into places anywhere with again, as I mentioned before, with signage, because that's something that I was able to accomplish through committees. People should right away should feel welcome and should feel encouraged to ask. And so that's what I wanted to add. All organizations should be moving towards that direction. Yep.
Rodrigo, you're saying something very important because when we design a language access plan, people forget about the entrance of a building or
Right.
an organization. You have to feel welcomed and you
Right.
have to feel that everyone there is willing to assist you. And it starts with language.
Correct.
That's an excellent point. I think that leads into the next question that we've talked about before is, what are some key challenges in ensuring equitable language access in maybe your organization or your community?
If I may start, so the software, the software we use, Epic, and I was since I've been attending different meetings, different maybe interviews. I realized that Epic is one of the most sophisticated softwares in healthcare, and some others do not offer that option of interpretation or translation of discharge paperwork, which is crucial. I mean, imagine going home with a form of something that you don't understand at all, and everything that involves your care, your health care, it needs to be it needs to be modified to your language. So I think that that's one of the most important things, to make sure that that the legal frame of work impacts softwares that allowed patients to go home and read their healthcare information in their own language, because you're not going to remember everything that is said to you when you are in the healthcare environment. So that's one of the most important for me. Then everything else, I think, is pretty much across the board, such as Cyracom and live translation or interpretation. But I think that I now know that there are many softwares out there that do not provide that translation discharge paperwork or any other paperwork.
From an LSP perspective and operations perspective, I can tell you that we've had difficulties when trying to get an interpreter for a language that a customer is not even sure what it is. Sometimes they would go by the person's nationality and how many languages can be spoken in Africa or any country in Africa, for example. And they have very specific requests, very specific languages and ramifications of languages, let's say. And in addition to this, having the resources for languages of lesser diffusion. I mean, there are thousands of languages, and us as LSPs only have access to maybe 500, 600 of these. We have had many challenges lately, like I mentioned earlier, with immigration, the refugees that we're welcoming to our country, and maybe individuals who are marginalized, that have been marginalized for years in our nation, maybe even born in our country. And when we're able to find a language, not even an interpreter, just a person who is willing to help their community to communicate, to explain what a patient in life support family wants to say to the doctor, then we have the laws and the regulations from this that I abide by, of course, and I agree with. But I think we have to open a bigger door for people who we really want to help communicate. We have a cousin that speaks Mayan and he's willing to help the patient, but then the law says that we cannot be responsible for what that person says. And then we're so limited to the training, the vocabulary, and I think something has to, be done around these areas. I can tell you hospitals do this without the law approving it. But for us as LSPs, it is very dangerous. We have many people who are not trained interpreters knocking on our door willing to help because they understand the need of this language to be spoken. And I think there's a big cultural advocacy that we all need to take place in. And I think it's fair now to start with language. We always think about inclusion in other areas, but what about this that we're doing, and what about this that we're trying to communicate?
Thank you. And just for those watching, LSPs is language service providers. And so that'll be people that you contract with or have as vendors, providing you different interpreters or translation services as well. Denise, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Just really short, I think those points are all really well covered. The only thing I'm going to say is there's obviously all kinds of laws and regulations that Katherine has mentioned that cover this area. And so I think it's really critical that we really try and balance the legalities with compassion. And that just involves kind of a modicum of common sense and, careful discussion and humanity on all parts. So that's all I'm going to say there.
Yeah, I agree.
Beautiful.
I often talk about the spirit of the law. What is the spirit of the law? And that's what we should be aiming for. Don't just do the bare minimum, but what's the spirit of the law? I will say, I do know that different organizations, when they do investigate, like whenever OCR gets involved or things like that, they do look at the organization's comparative financial capability or influence it may have. So it does take into account how big or small you are as an organization when it comes to different instances that need to be investigated of anything like that.
Which it should. I'm glad that's the case.
Yes, it should, because you can't just slap a huge fine on a tiny institution that can't quite have the ability to take care of that particular situation. So, so how would you say these challenges intersect with the broader issues relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I can start off with that. I mean, all these things are obviously intersected. So you think about, we talk about it, healthcare perspective, we talk about social determinants of health, right, and health inequities that are clearly very visible amongst certain populations. And you think about a very basic baseline is if you can't communicate, if one can't communicate what one's needs are, if one isn't able to, showcase with their family what they may need to do, then it's very difficult to get the care that you need. Now that's all saying that also doesn't negate the fact that we also know that even when people are highly educated, highly versed in a certain language, but there are certain marginalized populations, we are still not receiving the kind of appropriate care. So there's that as well. But there's also this baseline knowledge and access of just being able to speak and explain and having what's being said to you explained in an appropriate fashion. So these are very, very baseline concepts that should be very easy to fix. Simple, maybe not easy, but should be very simple to fix. But the reality is that that's not always the case. There's a will issue sometimes. We talked about a budget issue sometimes. There's another kind of access issue. So there's different things that we need to be taking a look at, but it ought not to be that the inability to communicate creates the kind of barriers that we're seeing right now.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I agree with what you just said. Equal opportunity and access is the first thing that I would agree with. It's the broader inclusivity issue, and to have all these laws intersect into the representation and the voice of patients and other residents and other citizens of the community. The other aspect of it is the health and well-being. It is extremely important that you have the population in a healthy space. So I think that that is very important, and also the economic and social stability. I think that we need to think in a broader aspect of if you don't have your population, that it's your regional or your community in a healthy state, that they cannot participate, they cannot be part of the community because of several reasons. They will remain that way, and that is definitely not healthy in many different aspects. So that's what I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Well, what are let's talk about some strategies or initiatives that people can kind of take away then when it comes to language access and the broader diversity, equity, and inclusion framework. What are some things that you've seen or implemented that you feel like was beneficial? Were there any particular success stories that you'd like to share, or maybe even relating to another area, or another story that you may know of from a friend or a family member even?
I can probably start with this question. For us, it's always making sure that the resource is there, available and able to assist. And we have heard so many successful stories just by us being able to provide translation of documentation, IEP meetings. Sometimes a child who does not speak English or their parents does not speak English is diagnosed with a certain condition, and sometimes this diagnosis happen because of lack of communication, of their parent not being able to read a document that the teacher has sent maybe 2 years ago because they don't understand the language. So we have seen changes by providing translation services together with interpreting services. And we have a very large school district that we have been servicing for a long time, for which our interpreters have been able to create some sort of bond with parents and teachers, and they've seen these students get better and their parents understanding more. But on a healthcare organization, particularly, I have interpreted for patients who a very typical and basic condition like high blood sugar, right? Diabetes. A patient has had diabetes for 10 years, living in the United States, speaking Spanish and not understanding a word of English sometimes. They get an interpreter for their follow-up any year after that, and they are explained how to take their medication. They go back to their visit and their sugar levels have been are stable. I know of a patient who has hypothyroidism, and this patient had a loss of a pregnancy. No one told this patient, or she didn't understand, because I'm sure the doctors explained that having hypothyroidism, which is low thyroid function levels in your body, can interfere with a pregnancy. So when they're diagnosed, they didn't understand during the pregnancy, they didn't understand how important it was to take the medication for their thyroids. Not taking the medication resulted in that person having a miscarriage. When this is explained at the doctor, and they were asking her, well, how do you take the medication? Oh, I take it with breakfast. Okay, but we had told you before that you have to take this in a fasting and that you can't eat for about 30 minutes. So she didn't understand this part. No interpreter, or maybe the interpreter that was provided did not explain it correctly. But how many of these stories, I can go on for days, I can tell you, sharing situations in which just having an interpreter or having a document translated helps. I on a jail, I remember as an interpreter having this person who was incarcerated. And in my mind, of course, I have no judgment of this because I need to remain impartial. I remember thinking this person is innocent. And I don't know how, I had this guy call in, this officer call in, and I would be the interpreter. Maybe they would request me, I don't know. But I had the ability to track the case for a long time and making sure that he was able to communicate what he wanted to say and repeating to this person interviewing them, the attorneys and all, I am innocent and this is my alibi. Imagine that he wouldn't have had ways to communicate in this circumstance. Many stories. I'll let someone else go on.
Thank you.
I can share one very, very briefly. I came from the hospitality industry in Miami Beach, and I started in the dental industry as a manager of clinics in Chicago, where it was the second largest Mexican American community after LA. So I landed in a place where it was a sub-product because my first language is Spanish. So I was naturally translating everything without any regulations, without even knowing what I was supposed to do, what I wasn't supposed to do. I was trained as a manager, and then I became a director and traveled here to Maryland, to this area. So in doing so, I realized that I needed to regulate some of the practices. And when I took over some of these clinics, they were producing a lot less than they were supposed to. So I started doing some outreach and grassroots work into churches, WIC communities, and Social Security services, and even to the refugee center in Baltimore. And I found out that there was a great community. There was a great need of people treating their teeth, getting some dental work and dental healthcare. And so in doing so, I realized that we needed to move forward. So we closed the clinics on Mondays and Tuesdays, and paired up with the MTA from the city, and brought them in buses to the clinics and took care of all of them with Syracom interpretation, live interpretation, and then we translated the paperwork in Burmese. These are 3 regions of China, India, Thailand that share that language. So imagine all this, that I was kind of self teaching myself how to do it. And then when I was hired in Hopkins, then I understood the whole broader perspective, but the necessity and the resolution was there, and we doubled the revenue, tripled the revenue, and it was great. It was a great help for the community that otherwise they would have not gotten any healthcare, obviously.
Thank
So
you.
that was a good for the community.
That's great.
That's an exciting
Denise?
program. Just really briefly, so one of the things that I want to say is oftentimes if people are not part of the dominant culture where they don't speak the language or they're not as comfortable, lots of different things, an invitation versus an application process works a lot better. So when I think about a survey, for example, that we did one time in a community at one of the hospitals that I was overseeing at one point, in the initial phase, we weren't getting a whole lot of responses from a particular community, which were known to speak a different language and be part of a different culture. And it was because I think there were applications and signs kind of put up everywhere. And it was like, oh yeah, we were doing this thing, please participate. But when instead we had spoke with a particular community member and said, can you go out to members of the community and invite them to participate? So when it's an invitation versus a very general application, the numbers of people that participated in that survey went up tremendously because people felt welcomed. They felt like they belonged, like their comments were going to actually be considered and were going to be desired. So this invitation versus application process works in so many different applications, so many places where if you just think about bringing people into the fold in a way that is actually welcoming, as opposed to a very general, hey, we got this thing going on, sign up if you want. And it's very much more effective.
Very good.
I love that because I worked in healthcare for many years as well, and it's we always noticed whenever we would go out to the community, like with clinical services, and just say, hey, we're going to be there, we're going to have interpreters, we're going to have all this stuff there, hundreds of people will go, and people may balk at the price of sending out teams of people to do that, but it's a small price compared to them showing up in your emergency room and then they're staying in your hospital for a few months, and you're basically footing that bill too. So it all kind of comes out in the end, so I think it's better to be proactive than reactive when it comes to language access. So moving along to another question, how can technology and innovation support better language access and inclusivity efforts?
I think the subject of AI opens a large opportunity for everything
I was
related
waiting
to
for it.
technology. And definitely our team has something very important cooking. I can't really provide any details, but I think that anything related to language access will be revolutionary in this era. Um, I always want to clarify that I believe with all my heart that interpreters will never be able to be replaced. There is a cultural situation that I hope computers can never get. But in the middle of this, we have to join technology with what we do, what we know, and make sure that the opportunities to communicate are broader and are bigger. I also think that people have a little scare when using remote interpreting services. And I think this is great. You know, over the phone interpreting is fantastic and it's not so technological. Use a phone, speak to someone that is going to understand your language. And not only us as language service providers, but the community has to put the word out there. Don't be scared if you don't get an on-site interpreter to communicate. We have voice only. And in the example of being, and I always go to healthcare because I'm really passionate about medical interpreting. I think you guys already know this, but if you're having a pap smear done, you're a woman, you don't want anyone viewing what they're doing. So OPI works perfectly. But if you also want someone via camera, technology helps there as well. And then I think about ways in which we can provide materials for translation. Are definitely many AI translation engines that our company I know uses, and other translators as well. Technology is life right now, and we have to link with it to make sure that our services are better rendered to the community.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that we've been using Cyracom, which I'm pretty sure that most of you know that service. It's live interpretation services that tapped into any interpreter around the globe at the time when it's needed. So yeah, we haven't had many challenges in that case, but I think that AI is the next step, and we have not tapped into it yet.
Let's not forget. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Katherine, please.
One of the challenges that we have had has been with people in need of sign language. And I think the community, the deaf and hard of hearing community, has to, and I know, and I've been told so many times that, and I understand it, that it's just a way that deaf and hard of hearing communicate. But if only we can open up a little bit more to video remote interpreting and welcoming this in and understanding that whatever Shawn on site is able to provide for you on site, maybe we can also provide it to you depending on the type of sign language that you need. We might be able to provide this as well remotely and with the help of technology.
So Denise, I wanted to change this question a little bit for you. I would like to hear your thoughts on, I guess, in a more broader, in the broader DEI space, how has technology and innovation supported those initiatives in providing workspaces that are more inclusive, but also being more inclusive to patients and communities for institutions that provide services?
I think we've got to be really thoughtful about how we use technology, because oftentimes technology is used in a way that is not helpful and being inclusive. And we think about all the different ways that, for example, AI right now, we're being very careful to think about AI not being coded with a bunch of bias, because we've seen that. I mean, I'll tell you a great story. I worked at an advertising agency very recently. Very early on, we were using Midjourney and Chat GPT. And one of the things that we did was we asked a prompt, show me a picture of a CEO, draw me a picture of a CEO in Midjourney. And it was, as you can imagine, all these different stereotypical white people, white men with glasses. I mean, all these different things. There's not a person of color in the bunch. Now, if you go in and do that, if you ask Midjourney, you're not going to get that same sort of thing because we've been thoughtful about that. So I think we want to be really mindful of the fact that oftentimes, the biases of these systems are built upon the biases of humans. We want to be really thoughtful about that. So a space that I think that technology has been really good in healthcare and just over DEI writ large is the ability to have a more diverse workforce. Because before, if people were looking at, all the different ways that we're gatekeeping, I don't think we were necessarily as thoughtful about how to unwind some of those. And now if you've got technology coming in and picking up, whenever you've got less human interaction is always the good and the bad, right? But if you've got technology that can just pick through and find skill sets that people identified that we need or that are needed for a particular role, then oftentimes you do have a more equitable outcome. We're never going to be able to, and should never, pull the human aspect out of what it is that we're doing, because the humans are ultimately the ones that are behind the coding, behind these ideas, behind these concepts. But if we can help with the erasing or eradication of some instances of the biases that are built into some of these systems, it would be super helpful. So I think that's where technology can be helpful. Whenever we're using technology to supplement how we're working with other humans, that's probably going to be our best bet. And I think that's where we've seen the most success so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a tool, and it all depends on how you use it. It can be used to harm or help, right? I appreciate that. Let's see. Another question we have time for. So how can we raise awareness about the importance of language access in promoting diversity?
I can start with that one, if I may.
Please.
I think that everything starts in school and PSAs. I think that media and impacts the greatest realm of everything in every human being conscious. So I think that PSAs and everywhere you walk in, it could be public transportation or anything, because even though I am in healthcare, I mean, there are many aspects, helping people. I just saw a documentary about doing brightly sidewalks for blind people that go with their canes, and they go through the sidewalks, and they can see if there is a bank or there's a pharmacy next to them. So then they will stop and they will go in. Imagine that. So those things should be promoted and make everyone aware from school curriculum. I remember back in Peru, we used to have Educación Cívica, which was nothing more than being civic and being a citizen.
We need that back.
When we were in third grade, simple laws of walking and crossing the road, or helping someone, or opening the doors, simple things like that. But it needs to be more reinforced. So school curriculum, PSA, media impact, and all that, it should be at the forefront, and also hand to hand with a legal and policy framework, of course. I mean, we need to get the buy-in of Congress to sort of mandate this everywhere across the United States. And cultural events, exchanging, promoting. I saw another one of a restaurant with people challenged that they were all the servers serving the guests, and the trays were color coded, so the chefs were prepare the food, and they were given the exact dish with the same color for a salad or a different color. So those things help. This was in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So I saw that, I was like, well, I mean, why wouldn't you go and eat there and support that business? And so those things need to be at the forefront. I think that's the number one, and Congress, of course, to pass laws into it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I would like to add about the importance of sharing your personal experiences in your community. When you're able to get together with people that share your same interests, if you can tell them, I went here and I was able to get assistance, and they brought this legal advocate to speak to us, and they also had a Burmese interpreter, for example. Community plays a big part in everything that we do, and I think everything has to start with our community. But also I have seen for many years that we're missing many advocates. When we get together with people like the four of us that are very interested in everyone receiving what their right is, I see that everyone is so willing to communicate and share their opinions, but who is actually advocating? We're missing people who are actually advocating with the government, our local government, our federal government, of, you know, people like Denise, for example, bringing all these needs out in the front end so that everyone is able to understand that we need them, our community needs them. It's important that we communicate.
I appreciate that. I love that. I think that's a great point. And I also wanted to talk about advocates, but I wanted to talk about advocates with a small a and advocates in a certain space. So, you know, we always talk about allies and people that if you hear something, if you're part of the dominant population, or you're part of the population that's not being marginalized at the moment, or your group right then may be dominant in that section, and you're hearing somebody talk about other folks in a way that's not appropriate, or that's hurtful, or that does not lead to inclusion or belonging, to speak up in that moment is really important, because you oftentimes hear people saying, oh my God, they should just speak English. No, sir or ma'am, it's not appropriate. And let's make sure that we are speaking up to explain why that's not an appropriate state of mind. So I think that the idea of being a small a advocate or a small a ally is really important. In those different spaces, the more that we can get people to be on board with understanding that inclusion, diversity, belonging, all that has to do with all the different aspects of someone's personality, someone's identity, all those different things are really critical, and that marginalizing or being negative about aspects of those is not appropriate, and that we, you know, we're not going to condone that. I think that's really an important idea. So we can help be more inclusive and be more thoughtful about how things get done if we are active in the moment of kind of shutting down those sort of negative energies.
That's such a great point. I do appreciate that. Yeah. I hope for people that are watching, I hope these are some nice takeaways that you guys can take away for yourself, that you can start implementing in your daily life. And I encourage everyone, it's great that you're active on social media and things like that, but please go to your local institutions and actually speak to people that are in different positions of authority and try to start having conversations, opening that dialogue, because a lot of times they may not realize there's certain situations that are happening that they need to address. You know, I'm not saying ignorance is excusable, but it's there. And then we need to help open people's eyes to different situations that our communities are going through, and, you know, uplift every community. Yeah, I do appreciate that. So we do have a couple of questions in our Q&A. So I would like to go ahead and address some of those. Mauricio has asked, would you agree that the ADA law offers distinct protections compared to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act? And
I'll
I
take
think
that
I'm gonna
one.
I was about to say, I was going to look at you, Denise, for that.
So I will say that I'm not going to profess to be an expert in either of those two things in general. Well, specifically, I should say. But I think, yeah, I absolutely agree. I do think that, to my understanding, the ADA does offer some very specific protections, whereas Civil Rights Act is much more general, right? And so I agree. I think it's a valid point.
Thank you. And then our other question is, in the context of advancing AI and technology and language access services, how can we ensure these innovations enhance rather than replace the critical role of in-person interpreters? Furthermore, how can we safeguard against organizations using these technologies to justify reducing in-person interpreter staff, thus preserving equitable access to in-person interpretation when it is essential for patient care?
Wow.
That's a
I
lot.
think,
Yeah,
but I think it's a great combination of questions. And the first one, I think that AI is in diapers, and to just a basic term. And this question, I think, speaks about the future. When I think of AI right now, I feel of where in any organization can I use it as a basic help, as a basic assistant? How in language access can I utilize AI to assist me understanding what language a person speaks? And then I can make sure that I can provide the right language for this person, as an example. And I think that how can we safeguard against organizations using these technologies? We need to advocate. This is our job, and we have been training for years to make sure that people communicate adequately and that we're able to provide the best service. And I don't think technology overall can do this. Culture is important. We are cultural brokers in all languages that we may speak. People need to have and provide services being kind, understanding the need of other people, including them. And Denise has said a word that has stuck to me. And I feel that we forget that the sense of belonging is a moral sentiment. I want to feel that I belong. How right now can technology feel that make a person feel as if they belong? As an interpreter in person or as an interpreter over the phone, I am able to make them feel, together with the client, of course, as if whatever they're trying to communicate, whatever their need is, whatever legal situation they're having, whatever I don't know, psychological, mental situation they're having is important, and that we're trying to understand to help them be understood. When I think of interpreters and the different types of languages that are, or dialects that are spoken in Spanish, and that I am Dominican and I speak Dominican Spanish, and then I have to communicate with a Cuban who speaks Cuban Spanish, right? How am I going to ask them technologically, can you please rephrase your term, or are you trying to say this? Is this what you're trying to communicate? And I think AI has a long way to go, has a long way to go. And in the meantime, as interpreters and as language service providers, we have to find a balance. So I'm hoping that our work continues. And if we see something happening, we need to advocate for something that we have fought for so many years.
I love everything that Katherine said. I'm just going to say two small things that are kind of enhancing what Katherine said. So the one thing is, we talked about earlier, AI is a tool. It's a tool. It's a tool. It's a tool. It should never replace human beings. Period. Point blank. That's all there is to it. And in that regard, I think when we talk about how we can safeguard the idea of keeping human interpreters around, it has to be, there's more allyship, there's more coalition building, there's more conversations. I'm not going to use the word union, but I like the idea that people can get together and make sure they're protected, because that just doesn't happen. And that's just the reality of things. We have to make sure that people understand the real value of the human connection with this sort of work. Interpretive, I mean, the whole word interpreter includes the idea of interpretation. And that's not something that AI is doing very well, and probably is never going to be able to do very well. We need to make sure that we keep that in place. And so I think that it's really important that the powers that be, they're oftentimes looking for budget-based decision-making, understand that there is a real reason why we need to keep the humans around. And so sometimes that involves linking arms and making sure that other people are also allied with the notion that humans are really critical.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think one thing I would like to direct people to check out is an organization called the Safe AI. And they have a website. I believe it's safeaitf.org, if I'm recalling the right URL off the top of my head. But if you look up Safe AI for interpreting, you'll be able to find it if you searched it. But they recently released some guidelines and encouraging people and end users of what to consider when implementing AI in the interpretation process or using that in any way. Yes, thank you. safeaitf.org. Thank you. So I would encourage people to go check that out for their organizations and see what's appropriate use for them. I think as an interpreter, what I tell interpreters is we need to do a better job as reframing what we're doing with technology. AI has been around in language services for 15, 20 years. It's not new to us. It feels new, but it's not. It's been around for a while. It's just is more, more present because it's the zeitgeist. And honestly, I think it's just more of a marketing thing. They're looking for a problem to solve with this product that they have. But I think with time, it'll stabilize. I think, for example, we have something called QuickBooks and other programs that we've been able to replace accountants and CPAs for 20 years, but there's never been more than in our entire history. Like, all of us can use those programs, but we usually pay someone to still take care of our taxes, to take care of our accounting and things like that, because there's all these different regulations and things that we don't quite understand, but we may be able to start doing things, but maybe we know enough to be dangerous. And I think that'll kind of come up with interpreting as well. We need to kind of reframe it and be like, yeah, I use AI as an interpreter or as a translator. And, it's a tool that me as an expert can use, but with you, it's probably going to be more dangerous in your hands, and that's just kind of how you frame it. Everybody has a hammer in their house, but they're not exactly, working on their house, are they? They're still hiring a handy person to come in and help them fix things. So that's just me. I'm speaking from my own personal experience. So my wife does not want me to take a hammer to the house anywhere.
It's 8 o'clock.
Very good.
Yeah. Let's see. Eliana brought up a good point about the ADA and the fines. I will say the ADA has lost a lot of its bite, though. In the last few years, the Supreme Court has removed some of the fines that can be associated with the ADA in civil suits and things like that. So a lot of cases have been not thrown out, but they've lost traction because of the legal fees, and there's only a certain amount of money that can be obtained from organizations pursuing civil litigation. So that's an unfortunate change with the ADA. So hopefully we can develop stronger regulations or stronger frameworks to help organizations to be more compliant, but also encourage them, carrot or stick, encourage them to stay on that course and being more inclusive. So, well, that's our time right now. I really want to thank Katherine, Rodrigo, Denise, and I want to thank those that have attended us here live and those who may watch this after the fact. I really appreciate it. What you guys are doing to promote a diverse and inclusive environment for your organizations, wherever you may work, is really important, but also supporting your communities and uplifting them. So I really do appreciate all of you being here. Thank you guys so much. We don't have a poll. I forgot. We don't have a poll for after this, but really do appreciate you guys for attending. You guys have a good one. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.